All right, thank you for joining me on my first tutorial video. I've had quite a few people contact me, both publicly in our Facebook groups, as well as through private messages, asking for some tutorials and information, helping them better understand the Silhouette Studio software. So with that, we're going to do our first tutorial with that. And I want to start today with just a basic introduction to the main features that I use in my daily projects. So what I've got here is just the main Silhouette Studio application open, just right here on the bottom of my screen. This is the main new project screen that you'll see, usually just a blank document. I happen to have a few open at the moment, but the current project we're on, you can see, is highlighted here in white. I can tab over to other projects that I may have running. You can also go to File and New to create one, but when you open the program, it will give you one by default. So once you have your open document, there are a few main things that I use on the regular. The first one being the shape creation tools here, both the line style as well as the actual shapes, and then with the higher versions you get a lot more shapes. So the line tools, fairly straightforward. For a straight line, you pick your 2 points, it draws a line to connect the two. If you want a vertical or horizontal line, choose where you want your first point, and then holding Shift will lock that axis. So you can see I'm moving left and right over my line. It's not pulling. If I let go of Shift, I can pull that line. So if you want a nice vertical line, hold Shift. If you want a 45-degree angle line, Shift will lock it, so you have a little bit of play where it won't move on you. Again, if you let go of Shift, it's going to be a rough guess. 45 degrees locking Shift, or again, horizontal. And that works all the way around 45 degrees at a time. So holding Shift will lock your line. Again, pick your second point, and it's done. So the straight line tool, very straightforward. I don't use it a lot unless I'm doing decorative cuts, but it's good to know it exists. Our next tool here with our connected lines, basically the same thing, except for it doesn't stop drawing or placing lines until you complete the shape. That we have our red highlighted point right here. That's our start point. When we make contact with that, that will complete our shape, and we're no longer drawing lines. You can click and, again, draw lines for a second shape, but as soon as we get to that red one, and you'll see it wants to lock to it by default. If I get even close, you'll see it snap. It wants to make sure you have a closed shape, which is important in a couple things we'll get to in a moment. There's two more, but I don't use the last one. The final tool that I use in this set is a rounded tool. I don't use it often, but I do use it. It's the same, again, concept with points to create lines, but this time the line will curve to kind of follow where you're going. It's not the most precise thing in the world, so trying to draw things like circles or ovals are going to be kind of a nightmare. I can get sort of vaguely close, but for organic shapes, like if for some reason I was doing more of like a kidney bean shape, I don't know why I would, but maybe I would, getting like a nice kidney bean type shape, it can be a handy tool. Again, I don't use it often, but it's a good tool to know about. The last one I've never found a use for, but might as well explain what it does. It's measuring, as you can see. I can't circle it because that's drawing. But on the left of my cursor there's a little 0 degrees. It's measuring angle between 2 points. So you click the first point to choose your origin, and then you're measuring a degree beyond that. And it goes in both directions if you want to go down to get a degree this way, or if you're going above 180 degrees, you can go all the way around and get to, say, 326 degrees, and it will show. Get my other stuff out of the way here, sorry. Let's clear this so we can see. It'll show the line that we're measuring. It is a cuttable line, so if for some reason you needed 75% of a circle, you will get a cut line, but keep in mind, if you're trying to cut a circle, this part here between these two lines, it won't be cut on your Cameo machine. So you'd have to rip it or cut it manually. So I'm not really sure, other than to measure, if for some reason I wanted to measure the angle over here, I don't know why I would, but let's just say I would. If I'm going, here, and we're measuring out from this point, and so we have 103 degrees between this line and this line on the top. Again, it's obviously more than 90, so I could guess. But if for some reason you were needing something precise, it looks like 103 degrees. So I've never found a use, but there it is if you have more uses for it than I do. But I do use the first two a lot. I use the second tool the most because it's quick and easy if I'm trying to roughly outline something to make weeding easier. If I have a nice basic shape inside, like so. Let's get rid of that so I can show you what I do. If I have a star here that I wanted to weed from my vinyl, I might put just a basic shape around it. Something to this extent. That way when I weed the vinyl, I'm only losing this little piece here of scrap and leaving my star that can be transferred to a coffee cup or a car or whatever that you're working on. So I do use this tool a lot for doing just a quick outline of my shape and eliminating a lot of my waste material. So this is by far the most used tool for me of the four. We have our shape menu. I use the rectangles again quite a bit for the same sort of reason that if I hadn't drawn this shape instead, I could do just a quick rectangle type. And then just like most paint programs and things, you can manipulate with these little side markers. Your corners are going to scale, and they keep it consistent. Your little lock will be turned on by default, so I can't drag more to the right than up. It's going to move you consistently because that aspect ratio here is locked. If you want to unlock it, just click on that, and now you have, oh, my mistake. You can change it manually. You have width is the W and H is your height. So if you wanted now to manipulate, you could say you want it 3 inches wide, and it's not going to change the height with it. When this lock is activated, if I now change my width to 2, you'll see that our height changed as well and the whole shape got smaller. So if you're getting weird movements, take a look at this lock because that's going to keep it consistent. But yeah, you can drag from the corner. You can do straight up and down, both from top and bottom, and side to side, like a lot of photo and editing type software. But if you're not familiar, it's a handy thing to know. You'll also see at the top here this little green circle, which when you get close to it shows a little circular icon for rotation. And you can rotate this around. Just like our straight line tool, if you hold shift, it'll lock. And you can see it says shift on the page. So it locks to that kind of home position. It'll lock to the 45-degree mark right there. You saw it snap in. And then each, again, 45-degree mark after that. So that works with anything. I can rotate the star the same way. Anything, it'll lock at that 45-degree mark. Even on bizarre shapes like this strange thing I drew here, you have the same rotation capabilities where it'll lock based on where the original position was. So that comes in handy, especially if you're trying to fill a page with things like stickers, where you want to fill as much space as possible. If this is in the default position, maybe all of this space here is lost. And so by rotating it, you may be able to get this closer to the top of your vinyl, and maybe you have a smaller piece that can go over here. So you can, I do mostly rotations for filling my page more effectively. I'm going to clear all these little bits, less distraction. So using the square tool comes in handy for this. I do use it for special designs and things as well. I'll get into more complicated ones in a moment. We'll leave it simple at make a square. Same thing with the rounded square, that we can drag out our shape and size. Again, if you hold shift, it'll lock it. So the aspect ratio is, in this case, a square rather than a rectangle. If you want a rectangle of any shape or size, just letting go of shift will unlock that square aspect ratio. And you can see the measurements there on the sides. That's how big this square is. You can get close if you want. or usually I'll just drag out a square like this, just so I have it, and then I can manually override the height and width here. So if I wanted like a 3-inch square, I can choose 3 and enter. Because my lock is enabled, both are changed to 3. So just like that, I now have a 3-inch by 3-inch square, instead of trying to drag out and get as close to 3 by 3 as possible. That speeds up my workflow. You'll also see when I click on this rounded square, we have a couple extra dots, and this chooses how aggressive of a square or how rounded of a square we end up getting. And so if you drag them all the way to the middle, you end up with a circle. And you can choose how much curvature you want to your design. And if you really wanted, for some reason, you could go all the way back to a traditional square. So the rounded square comes in handy. I use it for basic design work if I'm doing like a nice oval shape around text sometimes. The ellipse tool, very similar. Again, you can drag to whatever dimensions you want, or hold shift and get a perfect circle. I use the circles a lot. Very handy. And again, you can try to drag out to say, 2.5 inches and get close. Usually it won't let me. You see 2.497 and it jumps to 2.506. So if I wanted to be precise, I could click wherever, override here at the top to 2.5 and hit enter because we have a lock. And now we've got a nice 2.5-inch circle. So these tools I use a lot. This one, not quite as much, but it's still handy. Same, again, concept. Pick your point, choose your size. This one, there's no need to hold shift. It doesn't actually do anything because it is keeping it symmetrical regardless of where you drag. It's just rotating your shape. You'll see by default, there are 5 sides marked here in the middle. If you want, you can move into the middle and change how many sides your shape has. Obviously, you can't go less than 3 because you no longer have a shape. So I use this on occasion for some decorative pieces. Once you get above about 15, it starts to look pretty round. It's obviously not. If we zoom in, we currently have 30 sides. So once we've got zoomed in, you'll see that there are short, flat sections. So if you ever wanted a circle, you're better off choosing the ellipse tool and just holding shift to get a circle. But for different effects and shapes, this comes in handy. Then these, I won't get into much. I believe they come with the designer version of the software and higher. I don't believe they come in the free version. But obviously you can see what shapes they are, and they're manipulated, very, very similar to this currently, I forget what 7 is, but 6 is a hexagon. We'll go with 6 because I know that one. This now, hexagon, you do the same kind of thing. You choose your shape, you pull out your shape, and you can manipulate your sizing. Obviously a star, you've got 5 points by default, but again, if you want more or less, steeper or less. And that's the same with all of these. Same kind of thing with the star. You've got trees, shapes, arrows, all of these manipulated, very similar to both this now hexagon and our little star piece here. So that's enough on these tools. Obviously, they're fairly straightforward, but I wanted to mention what those do. Getting into the little bit harder aspects of our manipulation is this little target right here. I always forget what it's called, but it lets you manipulate the points of a shape. Let me scroll back up here a bit to a shape that we have created. There we go. Let's use this circle. So when I click on it with our tool here, our edit points selected, you'll see a circle is made up of just 4 90-degree curves. But if you want to, you can select individual points while this is selected and manipulate. So you can move each point independently of the others. If you choose to hold shift, does it not work on this one? Oh, it doesn't work on this one. When you move an item, it's helpful. I thought it worked for the dots as well, my mistake. That if you're moving an item with shift held down, which is not liking me all of a sudden, that's interesting. There we go. Shift held down. Even if I'm going left and right, it'll lock it to that axis. When you get back to the midpoint, you can lock it this direction or lock it this direction holding shift. But apparently I was mistaken, and moving this, shift doesn't work. So you can manipulate the points independently if for some reason you drew a circle but didn't want a circle. And then these blue handles help you manipulate the amount of curve or angle to your shape. And obviously, if you get it into the center, you've, in essence, eliminated that curve completely, and now you have a sharp corner. So that comes in handy. You can also, you'll see it's not selected at the moment. If you double click on your shape, it will switch automatically to your point edits, and you'll see the points appear. Same with the created shapes do weird things sometimes, where you can't manipulate them the same way. Yeah, and that's not letting me. So you'll see the square here is, and you can also add points. I did that one by accident, it reminded me. Let me move down here. While your points are active, if you click somewhere that doesn't have a point, you'll see this icon come up. And if you click, you've created a point where there wasn't before. And you can add as many as you want, assuming that little icon, the line with the arrow, pop up. And then you can manipulate shapes. If you wanted this to be a nice curved shape, you can right-click. And you'll see Make Curve light up here. What the Make Curve is going to do is make it a curve. But when you have it selected, you'll see this line here is bold. And if I click this one, now this line is bold. What it's going to change when you right-click and choose Make Curve is whatever is bold, whatever is highlighted at the moment. So Make Curve now makes the connection here our curve. So it didn't curve all of this, it curved the one that is selected. But you could do that. You could come into this one if you wanted. Again, right-click, choose your curve, and kind of manipulate the rest so you get a more even transition. And with time, you can manipulate it as much and make it as smooth as you want. But I'm not trying to make a perfect circle here. Just a quick couple of things with our point editing options. Being able to create points, move points, and if you wanted, you can always click a point and choose Delete on your keyboard and eliminate the point entirely, which allows you to get a smoother curve in this case because there are less points to have the curve between. And so same thing, I could come over and delete this one and just choose a nice curve between the 3 points that we have left. So that's all good there. Let's clear some more space. We've got our Lasso Select tool, which is similar to most other softwares, Photoshop, Paint, all of that. If we have a couple of things on the board, good enough. The Lasso tool lets us lasso what we want to select. It also, by default, lets you, anything you cross, even the corner like this, will select your entire completed shape. You can also select both if you wanted, lasso whatever it is of interest to you and your project. So I don't use it much. By default, when you have the arrow selected, it's a box select. And it gives you this nice rectangle. And again, whatever it touches, no matter how little of it it touches, you'll see a box light up around that piece that if you let go, they will all be selected, and then they move together. And that's pretty much enough. The pencil I don't use. I like drawing in real life, but they're not completed shapes. So they don't cut well, because even if you try to connect it, which sometimes it'll snap in like that, but if I'm drawing, let's say, a smiley face, a very sloppy, very fast smiley face, something like this, and you wanted to cut this out of vinyl, the smile here is just a line. There would be nothing, there would be a physical cut, but there would be nothing to remove or weed. And if you try to go back in with your pencil tool and like draw the rest of a smile, it won't snap to your starting point. So you end up with cuts that don't line up. So I don't use the pencil tool, but here it is. Now we're getting into more important stuff that we use a lot for vinyl projects. This one here being our fonts. You'll see our cursor switched from an arrow to the little font indicator. And once you click, you have a spot to type. Let's just type, I don't know, test font. And you'll see here, you've got this blue line on the end that determines how wide a certain row can be. So if you're doing multiple lines of font, oops, I pushed the backslash. Multiple lines of font, if this gets too narrow, it's going to force them onto the next line. So for most text, this blue line isn't important, but you'll see if I get too close, it'll kick an extra space between the two rows, and then you'll start pushing the font into additional lines. The main reason I'm mentioning this is one of the things that people don't seem to know about the software is how to type in a vertical format. If you want this to say test font vertically down the page, just bring this in far enough that it pushes all of your text into one. Oh, my little T is too narrow, so I have to put a space there. But usually, in most fonts, this is just the default Arial font. The letters are wide enough that now it's done the whole thing vertically. I'll zoom out far enough we can see it. There we go. That we now have vertical text by just dragging this blue bar over. And if you want to undo it, it was a mistake or whatnot, just bring it back. So that's a quick, easy way. Once you've done your font, just slide it as far left as it'll go. And now we're down to a vertical font, and it's all linked. You can move it where you need to put it. Let's get into colors. We'll use this font as a good thing, because I hate seeing font without fill. So you select whatever you want to highlight. It could be this hexagon. We're going to do the font. If you come up in this top left corner here where this grid, little chain-linked fence-looking part is, that tells you it is transparent or see-through, which is why we have no color in our letters. So if you choose this drop-down menu, you get a pre-selected set of colors. It's a font. I'm just going to do black. True black is in the top right corner right here. And you'll see our font is black with a red line around the outside. And we can zoom in a bit here and look at it a little closer. And you'll see the red line is going to be what the Cameo machine sees as a place to cut. You can turn it off by default if you like. It comes on red. It's still going to be there, and it's still going to cut. There's that transparent little fence-looking image here that will completely eliminate the red line, which I can find distracting. But if we go into the top right corner to our Send menu, and I put it on the page, there we go, you'll see it still turns red. It is still seen by the software as cut. I'm just really far away, so it looks terrible. If you zoom in, it is a normal cut line in red, even though when we view it, I moved it over, it's not there anymore. It is not appearing red here. If you find another color easier, you can go back to red. If you wanted green, blue, purple, whatever, you can choose that outline color that best fits your design. I tend to just eliminate it. I find it a little distracting, so I usually just turn it off. But here is some text in the vertical format. There's also another way to do vertical text. So again, we can choose our text tool here on the left, or the shortcut, which I use a lot for text, is just T on your keyboard. So if I don't have the text tool selected and press T, you'll see it's highlighted and selected there. If we do test, we'll select that and change our color. Let's do a nice like turquoisey blue aqua color there. If you wanted vertical font, but rotated vertically, you can either do what we did before and grab our rotation tool and hold shift to get that nice 90-degree lock if you want to type in that orientation. Or on the right side over here, we have our text tools. This is where you'll choose better fonts, because I hate Arial font. Even just changing to Times New Roman is a little bit nicer looking. I've got a laundry list of fonts that I have downloaded, mostly from the DaFont website. I do at this point almost all exclusively personal projects. So I have some that are for personal use only. You might see some of those here, like the Harry P font for Harry Potter. But with that, you've got all of your font selections. You can, like most Word document type programs, you can start typing it manually. If you wanted, say, Times New Roman, you'll see that it pops up. You can press enter, and it will kick to that. It's also an alphabetical list, as well as you'll see your frequently used text at the top. I hate that Arial's up there because it's the default, and I get it every time. And then the ones I have used most recently that have been selected by you. So Arial never comes up in recently used unless you've gone back and selected it. So I use the recently used ones quite a bit. You have your normal manipulation tools for text, bold, italicized, and underline. Just keep in mind with a lot of these custom fonts, these fan-made fonts like this Harry Potter, bold and italics are both grayed out. They are not available. They're not supported with this aftermarket font. Every font, at least that I've played with, does allow underlining, but I never use it. If I want font underlined, I'm going to take our rectangle tool on the side here, and I'm going to make it a little more interesting. I can choose how wide I want it. I can choose if I want it narrower or wider. That the default underline is very boring to me. So I can make a rectangle like this. We can choose our same color, make it match. Maybe I decide that's a little bit too wide. I can zoom in where I get my little manipulator thing on the side here. Oops, I made a square. Gotta select our move tool. Maybe I decide that's too wide. I want to bring it in a little bit. And we can use a good opportunity to learn something new. If we select our underline and hold Shift to select our text, so now both are selected, or you can box select like before, both. At the top, we have some alignment tools. This kind of cursor one here, this little like gun target, will center it to your page. So on our piece of vinyl here, or paper, or whatever it would be, if you press this little compass piece, oh, my mistake, this one, snaps it to the middle of the page, the one that's in a page. It threw me off as to what I just did. And you'll see it overlapped them because it picked the center of the images, in this case, the rectangle and our text, the center point of both, and locked them to the middle part of our page. The compass locks them together regardless of where they are on the page versus the lock to page. So those are handy sometimes, getting stuff to the middle of the page, especially if I'm doing something like this hexagon and I want it right in the middle. I can snap it to the middle there. And then if I'm doing my text, also snap it to the middle. And now I know the text is nice and centered in my shape. But let's say we wanted to make sure these line up. Select your text and your underline. And you've got a little drop-down menu here. And you'll see bars compared to a line. We've got the bars to the right, the bars in the middle, the bars to the left. Just like text alignment here, left justified, center, right. And I always forget what this one's called. You can left justify your text and your underline. You see that the underline moved over. You can center them to this axis, so they are left to right centered now. Or you can right justify them, and the underline has moved over to the right. You can go to the bottom, so it lines them up on the bottom side, lines them up to the middle, or lines them up at the top. So for an underline, I might do something like this. So I know they're now locked, centered this direction horizontally, and they are lined up nicely vertical as well, which comes in especially handy if I duplicate this underline, which you can do by either your traditional file, edit, copy, paste, which is your Control-C and Control-V. So you can Control-C to copy, Control-V, and it pastes the duplicate. Or in Silhouette Studio, once something is selected, you can hold Control and any directional arrow, left, right, up, or down, it will make a clone in that direction. So Control right will make a clone to the right. Now I have this one selected. If I Control down, you'll get a clone down for each time I press down. Left, down, up, right, doesn't matter. It will clone whichever direction you press in addition to the Control button. So Control down to make a copy. And I can make a little bit more decorative of an underline. So we can move this up, get it close to where we want it. Maybe this one wants to be a little smaller. Something like that. We can line up all three, centered this direction, and then make them a little nicer. Let's go this way. Oops, this one. And then I want to take my smaller one down. Let's get a nice even distribution. Oh, it went away. There it is. Even spacing. I actually don't like the way they do their even spacing. Usually the even spacing, I like their overall look. So I'll get it to where I want it then, and I'll just center it this way. So maybe you get a little nicer underline, something to that extent. So that's a little longer of a tangent than I wanted, but I find this underline with the text a little lackluster. So you can make your font a little more interesting with underlines and things that you create. You've got your line spacing, which is only useful when we have 2 lines of text. So let's make a second line. Your line spacing determines how far apart or how close together your lines of text in one text box are. You'll see it didn't affect our vertical fonts over here at all. It's only what is in this selected box. You determine how far apart it is or isn't. And the 100% being the default. We can put it back to where it was. With our character spacing, that is how far apart the actual individual characters will or again won't be. You've got your page positions, left, centered, right here, as well as at the top, like we mentioned a moment ago. You've also got your font size and your font at the top, as well as it is here. So you've got some different choices, but sometimes it's handy if maybe your page menu is open on the right, that you can select here, or maybe you're working on this S right here, and it's very convenient to just pop up and change what you're doing versus coming all the way across, getting into your text, changing it here, that it might save you some time, depending on where you're working on the screen. So that's pretty much all there is to be said about the main text. If you have the upgraded versions of the software, you unlock this Glyph feature, which is only relevant to some fonts, but it gives you more features and options. I'll quickly show you what that is. I don't want to take too much time, just because it is a premium feature. But you'll see with this font that I have, it puts this ribbon around it. But without the glyphs, there is no right end, which is unfortunate. If you don't have a paid version of the software, you basically lose the ability to use this font and make it look right. So I can delete my T, use this glyph menu here, this big G, and you'll see all the custom font options. And so if I scroll down here, there are a lot of them on this font, I have the ends of my ribbon, and you'll see each letter A, B, C. I got to go all the way back down to T for our test. They're so small, it's hard for me to see ST. It was not big enough, so we drag our blue line back over. There we go. And we can put our end on it. So this glyph menu is handy. You'll see some fonts, like this one has this curve on the front. Some fonts will let you put like a big swirly, crazy, fancy end on the front or on the rear. Get a nice little flourish on the front and back. This one is whether or not it has the ends that you can choose to do without. That there was I think there's a capital letter without. Maybe not. But you can choose your T from test without. It has the bars over the top like the E, the S, and everything does. You've got your different letters here. I'm not in the text. There we go. Where you can choose your extra letters that have the bar, as well as the letters that have the flourishy banner effect. So the glyphs are handy depending on your font, but again, in the basic version of Silhouette Studio, unfortunately, you don't have those. But a lot of free fonts don't really support extra glyphs anyway, but there are a few exceptions. Like this font that I have here is a free font and does have some glyph support, so you can put your end on the banner. Enough on the font. Let's see, we got a couple more things I use regularly, and then we'll wrap this video up. It's running a little longer than I had hoped. We've got a few more important tools, though. On the right side, one of the most important, we have our page setup. Usually this opens by default, but I've had a couple times where it doesn't. So your top little page or paper image here, this is where you're going to set everything for your Cameo machine. You're choosing your machine. I've never had it not properly know that I have the Cameo 4, but if for some reason, maybe you have multiple hooked up, or maybe it had a weird error and it loaded the Curio version, I can go in and choose the Cameo 4 because that's what I'm running with. Your cutting mat, whether you are or aren't using a mat, is up to you, but make sure it is properly selected here. I currently am set up to run the mat. It's hit and miss if I do. The last project I was printing stickers though, so the mat was very handy for that. But if you want to run no mat, just make sure to choose mat none, and you'll see the image of the mat around the outside when it comes and goes based on whether or not you have that selected. So that's a good visual right away of obviously you have the mat turned on. You can see it here, as well as it saying the cutting mat is selected as auto for the Cameo. You've also got the other mat choices, the portrait 8x12. You've got the 12x24. My machine doesn't have the 24 wide because I don't have the Pro, but you'll also see an option for the 24 by 24 if you have a machine big enough to utilize it. I do not have that option. So 12 by 12 for me. You can also choose the size of your piece, whether it's paper, vinyl, cardstock, whatever. Mine's set by default to 12 by 12 for just a standard sheet of vinyl. But say you're using a 3-inch by 3-inch scratch piece of vinyl. You can change it manually to go 3 by 3. You can put it on your sheet here. I have it shown cut border there. You'll see a red line appear and disappear. That's the boundaries of my selected size, this time being 3 by 3. Usually, because my space is white, it's obvious where that 3 by 3 is. But if your transparency is turned down, now I've lost the square if my cutting mark is turned off. So you have the option to turn the cutting border on so you can see the limitations of your 3 by 3, as well as the transparency of your workspace. It obviously changes nothing in real life. It's just for ease of viewing on the screen, whatever's easier for you. I like to see it. I also like to have the cut border on. You don't really need both. Just for me, for some reason, I find that easier to view and just work with. You can also do constrain media to cutting mat, which makes it so that if you do something like this, you get an error when you try to cut it saying something along the lines of a warning, it doesn't fit, do you want to continue anyway? And you'll get a weird cropped part of this text because it is limiting it to your mat limitations. So I usually keep that checked on, but either way, when you send it here, it makes it pretty obvious if anything's in your space or not. So if you're comfortable either way, on or off on that one. Other than that, that's pretty much it that I use here. You've got a color selection. Again, it's just visual if you wanted that selection to be a different color. I almost never use this. The only time I would is if I was working with text or something that's, say, white. It's now very hard to read. Again, it does nothing. It's just visual, but I might go to like a black piece of paper just so it's easy to see my white design. Other than white font, I always leave this white. It's just easier for me to see. That's enough on that. Let me go back to my default 12 by 12. And that's enough of the page setup here. You do have a grid option, which I have enabled. You've got show grid on or off. It's also, I believe, G. Yes, G on your keyboard for grid. You've got your snap to grid option. I don't use it, but it is handy for depending on what you're doing. If I turn that on and move something, which of course I made white, make it hard to see, I think text snaps. It does. So you'll see I can't move it smoothly, even though my mouse is moving smoothly. It is snapping to the grid that I have on my page. So for certain things, that's handy. If you're trying to line things up, maybe you want this text locked in between inside of a rectangle, you can use your alignment tools and center it, or you could snap it into place. I don't tend to do snap, but every once in a while I'll enable it. Your ruler, again, I'm pretty sure this is not in the free version, but anything higher will give you these rulers top and side. If I want to turn them off, you can. I personally like having them. They're out of the way. And you'll see it follows my cursor regardless of what I'm doing. You've got a shadowed area here is the width of the selection. And then wherever the line is where my actual cursor is. So I'm cursoring to this text. And you can see that the selection at the top on the ruler move as well as the line. So I was trying to get it to maybe exactly 2 inches on my cutting mat for a specific project. I could move it over until the edge hits right at 2 inches and let go. It actually moved just a hair on me. You can move it manually with the keys on your keyboard if you want to fine tune. I'm using a stylus pen on a drawing tablet today. So it's way more precise for drawing, but sometimes letting go of text or something I have selected, it might move like 1 pixel when I let go. So if you're trying to fine tune something, you can always do it manually with your keyboard arrows as well. Other than that, I don't really use anything else here. There is a crosshairs option, which just shows you where your mouse is. I debated doing this for the video, but instead I did the scrolling mouse. I found it was a little easier to follow where my mouse was going. Plus, when I go over a box like this, you can still see my cursor versus the crosshairs go away once I'm over a menu. So I decided not to go with the crosshairs and just use this shadowed cursor. Other than that, that's pretty much all I use. And then the last one, I don't do the registration marks for print and cuts, but they're here if you're wanting to do them. I do them all manually. I might get into that in a later video. I don't want to really overwhelm you. But if you're doing print and cut stickers, these markers are handy. The Cameo will read them with its little camera or laser or however it does it. I'm not entirely sure the technology behind it, but it'll read these 3 corner marks and use that as reference to cut your image. I never do it this way, so mine's always off. But if you're wanting to do it or found a tutorial on print and cut, this is where you'll use those settings. The PixScan menu, I don't have a PixScan board, but if you do or are interested, it's this button here. Next is your color selection, very similar to the one in our top left, where we chose our text color here. The only difference is these are pre-selected. You don't have like a color wheel to choose from. Here is where you get that color wheel option. If you don't like, say, these 5 greens, I guess there's 10 because there's these kind of olive greens, or these, 5 red to pink colors, you can come over to this side, choose your little color palette, and now you have access to everything. You've got the same colors here. You've got your recently used. You've also got a few specialty ones like gradient tools, which you can also customize using these sliders. And you can see that's reflected in real time on my selection as I move things around. So if you wanted a custom effect, again, if you're doing vinyl cutting or cardstock cutting, this changes nothing. It's just visual. But if you were doing a print and cut and you wanted it to print black, red, yellow, then doing so here, or changing colors, adding green, adding blue, whatever you want, and making custom gradients is an option here. I usually use it. Oh, it's loading again. I'm sorry. There it goes. I have too many things running with the recordings and everything. But I use this a lot to pick cleaner colors. Even the purest red isn't all that red. So I tend to go into like a deep red, which is going to load again. Come on, you can do it. There we go. And then you can even change your hue of the red. So you can go into the deeper reds, which turn, black if you go deep enough, up to the most pure version of that color. So this comes in handy depending on what you're doing. Again, only really handy if you're going to be printing. If you're just using it for visuals, your normal menu here is usually more than enough because it's going to cut whatever color you have on your cutting board or your cutting mat, or if you're using a roll, just whatever vinyl you have on your machine. So this isn't too helpful for a lot of people, but it's very good to know about. And then the last thing, I guess there's 2 more main things. But one that people ask about constantly. Let's talk about the trace feature. Let me just go onto my other screen here and pull a file. I'm going to use... I need a good example. Let's get... Totoro will work. We'll pull him over. There we go. So we got a little Totoro image. I made this one. It's already in a SVG format, so you'll see there's no border on it, which I'm actually going to add, because if you're getting a picture from, say, the internet, usually it will come in as a normal image. Let me link these together, and then I'll talk about what I did shortly. Okay, and we're going to group those. Okay, so normally, if you input a photo, you're going to get something like this, where you've got a square or a rectangle, usually from Google, or if maybe you took a photo, maybe you even drew something, I don't know. But you've got an image, you want this part of it, but you've imported this whole thing, and you'll see the red line around the outside, again, is our cut line. So if you were to put this on your mat and send it to the cutter, you're going to get a square, which obviously is not helpful if you expected this little Totoro guy. So this is where the trace tool comes in very handy on the far right of your screen here. I've heard it called a butterfly. I've heard it called toast. I don't know what it's supposed to be, but this little icon here, the 5th one down, is your trace menu. This is available in the free version. The paid versions get you more features, which are very handy. I do use this one a lot. We'll talk about in a second briefly, but the trace feature is available to everyone, and it is a very powerful tool. So you'll choose your select trace area, and you'll draw out whatever you want to trace. I purposely made it too small to show you that once you've drawn it, whatever's inside of this space, it is going to try to trace. And so whatever you see in yellow is what it is tracing or going to outline. I have missed part of it. If that's the case, just like any other shapes, you can drag and manipulate the shape. So you can make sure your whole image or whatever of the image you want traced is selected. You'll see it yellow. On the side, we have a couple of options. I always lower the scale down to the bottom. It makes the edges around the outside usually the smoothest. Every rare once in a while, there's an exception. Let me zoom in a bit so we can see this. I'm kind of far away. If I have my scale up, it usually starts around 12, I think. You'll get some like stair stepping, which is more obvious to me once I've actually traced it. But to me, I usually get smoother transitions and curves with a lower scale. And then the most important slider is this one here, this threshold. Especially when you have a design that's not just black and white, the threshold is incredibly important, which I'll show you in a second on a second image. But so once you have your main piece selected, I bring the scale down, and you want to adjust your threshold. If you go low, it picks less and less of the image. And as you raise that up, you'll see more of it selected. And I'm watching spots like at the bottom right here, where there's a little bit of the black remaining, that I just bring the slider up until everything that I want, there it goes, you saw it kind of pop there at the bottom, that last little bit popped up and got selected. I've got pretty smooth edges. All the black is now gone, it's all turned yellow. And then we can choose the trace option here, and that's going to trace everything that's yellow. The eyes, the whiskers, these little center spots or whatever that you call them that he has. We choose trace. It looks like nothing has changed, except for if you look, we now have the red cut lines that were only on the square before. So if we take our square and drag it out of the way, you'll see we now have our little guy, our little Totoro here, as a cut file. That this one is basically not cuttable. If we send it to cut, it's going to cut. Actually, it's misleading because I made the SVG. Normally, this would all be one. It would look like this. It would cut this square, and you would not get your little cutout in the middle. Now we have the full cutout. If we get him out of the way, let me deselect him. If we put him on your little setup and put him on the cut, now it's all being cut out to where you can weed it from vinyl or whatever you were working on. We can also add color to him just like everything else. We want to make him, I know he's kind of gray in the show. Maybe make him gray. Again, that's just visual unless you're printing. And then this is all one image currently. I've had a lot of people in the groups ask how to say, maybe they want to move these little triangles. Remove them, maybe put in a name like Michael. Let's do that. Let's combine a couple things we've learned. If you right-click and release compound path, it's going to put him back into his full form. Nothing is cut out, and everything on its own is now selectable. Undo. And so if you want to remove something, like this piece is now no longer a hole. It's a separate piece. You're going to select the one you want to be a hole, and whatever you want to cut the hole out of. In this case, it's his body. So his little belly piece, hold shift, and click the body. So you'll see now our selection is the body and this little belly piece. And you're going to want to go on the right side here to this little overlapped rectangle and circle, which is our modify tab. I only use a couple of these, but we want to subtract the circle from the body. So we have subtract, and you'll see it's cut out the circle. There's now nothing here to select. It's gone. It is now a hole. Undo. And same thing with his eyes and his nose. Select his nose, select his body, and subtract. This seems like a waste of time probably to you at the moment because they were all just there. And now I'm going back and putting them back. But it is important, depending on what you're doing, to do it this way. Generally, if you're just going to cut the shapes, absolutely. Do your trace, it's done, and you can send it to the cutter. But if you're going to start editing this piece, as I'm about to do, just quickly, I don't want to overly confuse you. I just want to show you some of the things that are within our capabilities with the software. I'm going to box select and delete these 3. If you wanted to personalize this and make it like a cake topper or something, you could put, happy birthday. You could put, Tom, whatever you wanted. Let's just do a simple one just to show what can be done. Let's do, we'll do Tom. That's what I said. Oh, I'm in a fancy font. Let's change that. So we select our font. I'm going to do it from the top this time. And you'll see here as well, you can see what the fonts look like, which is handy. You don't have to guess. Some of them are fancy and ridiculous. And anytime you click on one, it'll instantly update. And then you can choose... Oops, I clicked out of it. Oh, I misspoke. It works well from this menu. That once you have selected a font, you can then just push up and down on your keyboard, and it will go through all of your fonts alphabetically. Let's just pick one just real quickly, because it doesn't ultimately matter. We're just doing it for the sake of showing something you can do. So we're going to select this and our Totoro image and do the center like we learned a minute ago. So now Tom is centered left to right in this space. Unfortunately, because we don't want it centered into Totoro, if you want it centered this way, you have a couple of options. One, you can just kind of eyeball it and get close. Or what I like to do, because this is basically a perfect circle, is draw a circle. So I'll draw out a circle, get it about the right size, move it into position. Doesn't have to be perfect, as long as it's basically centered. And the closer you get it, the easier it is to tell that it's a centered shape. So we're worried about getting this to fit. So if we get it something like that, this base, I'm going to put it to the bottom of it. I think that's going to be a better look for what we're going for. But if we have a nice circle, now we can center Tom to the circle. Select both of those and center them. And now we can delete our extra circle. And now Tom is kind of centered in this space. Depending on your font, like this one, to me it doesn't look centered. And I would rather have a piece look like it's in the middle than actually be in the middle. So you can always go through, either move it with your keyboard and mouse, click and drag it around, or if you want to, again, fine-tune it with your keyboard, that I'm looking at the space between the edge of this M and the end of his belly versus the start of the T and the belly. And to me, the way that it's shaped and the T on this side, I just wanted it a little more to the left. So I'm going to put it somewhere like there, maybe make it gray like he is, and have that be our custom design. Okay, so that's something you can do with the trace. There's also a couple versions of trace. I won't do any more editing on them because it takes a bit of time. But we'll go back to our trace tab. That was just the standard trace. So trace area. We did trace right here last time. You can bring our scale, bring this back up to make it fill all the black. Perfect. If you do trace outer edge, it's going to be very similar, but you'll see it only did the outside part of what we traced. So none of the interior details have been done at all. So again, depending on the project, very handy to do outside edge instead of tracing all of the details. So those are the two there. If you were to do it again gray, maybe you're doing a cake topper and you want this piece and this one with Tom elevated in front. You could cut this one as well as cut this one and then overlap them. And then the last trace option you have in the free version, let's do a last box here. Bring this down, bring our threshold up, make it look smooth and nice, something like that. We have trace and detach, and this is where it's very helpful for stickers, which is the one that I imported in the first place. Now when we move this, our background, if you had a Google image or your photograph or a scanned copy of a kid's drawing, you now have the extra background nonsense that you can just delete. Select it, delete it. And you have this traced and detached. It has detached with color everything that was there. This is super noticeable if I drag in one of my other projects I was working on. This little Hello Kitty here. If you were to, this was a color print for a sticker that I worked on. So yeah, same thing. If we mess with our settings, maybe something like that, do a trace and detach, and move this, you'll see it left behind pieces, and we get our colors still that are printable. If I was printing a sticker, you get the red Honda logo here. You're going to get the black printed on the white, and it's for cutting, for your print and cut. It's going to get you a nice clean cut around that traced image. So depending on your project, you have the 3 types. Just a standard trace that you can add color to. You have your trace outline. Again, you can add color. And you have your trace and detach. I forgot the detach part, which gets you your colors here if you're going to do stickers, or you just like visually seeing it. Keep in mind, if you cut this, it will look like this. It's going to cut that outside edge where our red lines are. But for print and cut, or just visually seeing it, the detach feature is very handy. And then the last tool that I use, there's a couple extras that are handy, but we won't get super complicated. The last one is the offset tool, and I get a lot of questions about this. Let me delete all of the distractions. Let's do just a basic square. We'll hold our shift, draw a nice square. Our size doesn't matter for this. We're just going to show a tool. This offset tool, the star with a line around it, you select what you want an offset on. You can either do an offset to the outside, so you have it out here, or you can do it to the inside and you'll have one in here. And you see both of those options here, offset or an internal offset. So maybe we're making a picture frame type design. We can add an offset. You choose the amount of offset you want. We have a 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch square, so maybe we want a 1/2 inch worth of frame. So we choose 1/2 inch. It doesn't change automatically because we're still in this box. So if you just click outside of the box, you'll see that has updated. And by default in mine, I only really use the squared corners, but it keeps defaulting back to the curve. So you'll see the curved corners here. If you don't like that look, you can choose square corners. And then if you have a design that's not 90 degrees, this slider will choose, I guess it is doing it with 90 degrees. That's new. I didn't used to do that. Oh, it's making them angled. Okay. So it's kind of confused. But if you have a design that has edges to it and not just a square, as you bring that corner limit down, you'll see it'll start to round off the corners, whether you have the square or the corner design. It didn't do it for my squares in the past, but it looks like if it's at the absolute lowest, it will do it for a square now. That's good to know. Above 1, it's a normal 90-degree bend. So if you want a curved edge, or apparently now a chamfered edge, where you get the 45-degree corner, just bring your corner limit all the way down with the corner selection. So I learned something new today as well. So we've got our offset. That was the important part there, so I got kind of distracted. And maybe we want one more in between these two. To do an internal offset, you can see right now it's on the other line. We don't want that. Maybe I want it about 1/3 of the way in. We did a 1/2 inch outside, so maybe I want to go 1/4 to 1/3 of the way back in. So let's change this from 0.5. Let's maybe do 0.15. Now click outside of that box, and you'll see it updated. And so now we've got this design here. So that's what the offset tool is going to do. You can go outside of your design or inside of your design, like this one was inside our outmost box. It comes in very handy depending on what you're doing. I use it a lot for stickers. Let me show you how I do that, because it is a real-world application versus just this hypothetical box. Let me drag in this Harry Potter design I worked on. Gonna get this out of the way. So if I have a sticker design like this one here, and you'll see a lot of stickers have kind of like a halo around them, that's where this offset tool comes in handy. We can choose offset, and you'll see again, it has added our red line. It's the last measurement that we used was the 0.15. We can leave it if we like the look, or we can change it. Maybe I'll do 1/4 inch on this one just to change the number and apply. Most stickers tend to look pretty good with a white border around them. Let's maybe do a white border like this. That way you can print this image, and then it'll cut out here giving you that nice, clean, finished sticker look. The same thing I did with my Lilo and Stitch sticker that I made the other day like this. So I put the offset around the design. You can see it's around the letters as well. So it follows the shape of the font. It follows the shape of the droplets and the drips and runs. And makes a cleaner sticker design. It's also helpful for areas like this, where if there was no background, the font would be floating. You'd have to apply it with transfer tape or awkwardly by hand. So this links all of the text and the image together. Same with the little droplets, splatters, whatever you want to call them. Would be a nightmare if this wasn't all connected. So it connects our overall image. It also gives that clean sticker-like look with the offset. So that is the offset tool. You can do it in simple designs. You can do it, like I said, in a text. If you wanted to say offset. Oh, I keep putting that font. I don't. It's too fancy and hard to read. Let's just do corporate, nice and simple. So you can do an offset on the font, which looks super chaotic. It is not going to be super chaotic. It is the amount of offset around each letter. It's a small font. Let's pick a small offset. So you've got a lot of overlap and craziness going on. Once we accept or apply this offset, it's going to link all of these together, and you'll get the outmost edge as the new offset, which you'll see when I click this button. So you have this information now, but you can see a couple of strange things happen with fonts or small designs. It has added this, even though we chose offset, this is technically an internal offset of the O, because our O, make a color so we can see it, our O is right here. This was hollow space, and now we have hollow space inside of hollow space. The same thing happened here. We have hollow space between the two F offsets, and we have this little guy here. Using that like point edit mode, which either again you can double click or you can just choose it from your bar here. We can select these points and just delete them. Same with this one. Just delete. And the little one in the E. If you want them there, that's fine. For the look that I want, maybe I don't. And then you can choose your offset. Again, if we're doing like a sticker, maybe we want it white. And it would look something like that. And then the last thing that we do that's super helpful is right now they're two separate things. Which you probably don't want, because if you go to move this, maybe onto your mat, you're like, oh no, I've messed up. And now you're trying to like manually line them up. I'm just going to undo them and put them back. You can go in and do your center and get them to reline up. Sometimes, depending on font, though, I don't like the way it looks. So maybe you want to select both. And this one here is going to group them together. So if you choose this, we no longer have two selections. We have one. If you wanted to edit it, select it. And now you see group is grayed out, and we have ungroup. And now you see two selections again. So that comes in very handy. Once I'm kind of done with an object, I will group it. And then when I want to move everything to my cutting space, I can just drag it and not forget a piece behind. Like if I try to move these squares, I now only have one. But if I select them and group, now, oops, if I select it first, then they all move as a set piece. And that comes in handy so you don't accidentally mess up your project. So I think that's everything. I know it's a little bit overwhelming, but that kind of covered everything you'll mostly ever use. You've got your tools on the side. You've got your manipulations across the top. If you have images selected, we had our image manipulation. We had our alignments, position on the paper. If you have more than one, you can have them linked together, group and ungroup. You can link them all so that they meet in the same spot. These are the only things we didn't really talk about. This is our offset again. It was on this side that we did it, but it's up here as well if you want to do an offset. We'll touch these very quickly. These are the positions. These are layers. So some things are above or below others. The white is below all of that. And the stitch sticker appears to be on top of everything but the offset. When you have something selected, this is the position in height, if you will. So the stitch sticker at the top, this is place on the top, this is place on the bottom, so it'll put it behind everything, this will put it above everything. This is above one layer, this is below one layer. So if I click it once, it'll go down one layer, which would have been below offset. So I go down one layer. It's now below the squares. The next square, the next square. Is there more than I thought? Did I break him? Why are you not going backwards, Mr. Stitch? Mr. Stitch? Back. Forward one. I'm going to delete this extra. I have too much stuff on here, I think. I'm just making it confusing. Let's delete all this extra stuff. All right. We have 3 things. That'll be easier to see. So we have him. We can move him up a layer. Maybe we can't. What is wrong with him? Something is wrong with Stitch. I don't know what's wrong with Stitch. We're going to get rid of him because he's being weird. I've never had that happen before. But with these two, I just saw them work. So you have up a layer, down a layer. Same with this one. You can select this one. You can go down a layer, so it's behind. You can go up a layer, so it's in front. I'm not sure why Stitch was being weird. That was a bad example. But yeah, so if you wanted the white on top for some reason, obviously in this case we wouldn't, but you could select your white and bring it up. Or if you had a few things, like 3 of these. So you've got a project going on of different shapes. Maybe you don't want to bring it up and up and up and up. You click your white. Oops. Click your white. And then choose your, bring it on top. You can see this one, the main piece is behind the gray ones. This one, it's in front of the gray ones. So this one is all the way to the front. This one picks it all the way to the back. So these are very important, and that's what they do. You can also right-click, and you'll see those as well. Send to back, bring to front, or you can go forward and backwards 1 level. So those are good to know. And then the very last piece, and then we're all done, is this image here, which is grayed out because I only have 1 thing selected. But if you have 2, and you choose this, it's going to, what the system calls weld, it's going to weld them or fuse them together. And so you'll see that both of those were combined, and the primary shape takes over. So we had a white space is now taken over this one. So same thing, if we take this one, it has to be overlapped at least some in order for the weld to work. So maybe we want to weld it right there, select this one and weld. And you'll see it connected it and took over that shape. So that's kind of the last tool that I use is the weld feature. I may do a video with more information on good ways to use that. But especially really quick, with a text, we'll show it nicely. Let's get a nice script. What's a good script? Let's do this one. It'll show a real-world application where the weld is very important. Black. Let's do... I want something that overlaps. What overlaps? Oh, nothing on this one? That's all right. We learned how to make them overlap. Writing. If we go to our fonts and we put them closer together, we learned that earlier. Something like this. Obviously, it's not pretty. That's not the point. But what you'll see when we get in close is that there is font and cut lines overlapping. So if you send this to your Cameo, it's going to cut this R, and it is going to cut this I. And so you're going to have where this red line is, this awkward rectangular shape cut out. There's almost no time you're going to want this piece to be separate. Same with the wedge in the N and the G. You wouldn't really want this wedge not attached. And the T and the I, again, would have a weird cutout. If we choose our font and choose weld, you will see all of those weird cut lines are now gone. This is all one piece. This is all one piece. And this has been fused as one piece. So when you go to send this to your cutter now, it will cut the outside edge, and you will have exactly what's moving right now as your end piece, whether it is cardstock or vinyl or otherwise. You will have this shape, you will have this shape, and your 2 dots. And once you apply your transfer tape to this and pick it all up, you won't have weird pieces falling out or causing weird seams on your projects. So this is one great example where welding is almost required. You could technically not do it, but it would make your project look less professional. So there's a good example for weld in a real-life application. So that is more than enough for this time. That is a good rundown of all the tools I use on the regular. And then next time I plan to upload a video, probably in the next couple of days, will be a video on a real-life project. Nothing too complicated, but start to use some of the tools we have learned in productive and lifelike ways. Projects that you might do on your own. Cutting like a box maybe is an option, making a little gift box. We may do stickers, things of that nature. Let me know in the comments if there's anything specific you would like to learn, or if there's anything in this video maybe that I covered too quickly, you're not sure was understood. Maybe because I do it regularly, I don't think about it as much. Maybe I didn't explain part of a tool. So maybe there's something that I just missed, and so everybody's confused. Make sure to let me know. I don't think about a lot of what I'm doing here because I'm on this every single day without exception. I've only been doing this since about Halloween. But since then, I've been on this software and cutting with my Cameo every single day. So a lot of the things that I'm doing, I don't honestly think about. I'm doing out of habit and routine. So yeah, definitely let me know if there's anything that went over your heads, whether it was a lack of understanding on your end, a poor description on mine, or maybe a small combination of both. Also, if there's any other tools that you want to know more about, and maybe some ones I didn't cover. I covered all the ones that I use regularly, but there are definitely many other tools. This rotation tool, there's the eraser, the knife, things like that, that are useful tools. I just don't find myself using them. Definitely let me know, and I can do videos on those as well. But anyway, thank you so much for sitting through all the information today. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming and you learned some new things. If nothing else, I learned something new with the rounded corners on that square. So hopefully I was helpful, and I'd appreciate a like or a subscribe if you're interested in more. I'm planning on doing more of these videos because I have had probably 50 people from my Facebook group now comment and contact me, letting me know they're very interested in some of the skills that I have. And with that, I will say goodbye for this time, and I appreciate your time being with me.